Stop acting like a victim, Mom. That was the sentence my daughter chose, standing in my own living room, her arms crossed, her voice calm, like she was explaining something obvious to a child who just refused to understand. I remember the exact moment because of how quiet everything felt after she said it, the ticking of the wall clock suddenly louder, the hum of the refrigerator stretching across the space between us, and the way my hands didn't shake the way I expected them to. I thought they would. I thought I would feel something immediate, something sharp enough to push back, to defend myself, to say something, anything, but I didn't. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman standing there anymore. Emily Carter, my only daughter, the girl I raised on double shifts and packed lunches and late-night homework sessions at the kitchen table, was looking at me like I was a problem she had already solved. "You keep bringing up the same things," she said, her tone even controlled. "Old stuff. It's exhausting." I nodded. I actually nodded, like I agreed with her, like everything I had carried for years was just clutter I had refused to throw away. Jason stood a few feet behind her, leaning against the doorway, not saying a word, just watching, like this wasn't his place, but he wasn't going to stop it either. I noticed that too. I noticed everything. The way Emily didn't wait for my response. The way she picked up her phone like the conversation was already over. The way she said, "We're trying to move forward, and you keep pulling us back," as if I was the one holding them in place. I could have told her about the documents. I could have told her what I had started to suspect, the small inconsistencies that didn't sit right, the signatures that looked almost like mine but not quite, the statements that arrived later than they should have. I could have asked questions. I could have demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I said the simplest thing I could manage. "Okay." Just one word. Quiet. Final. She exhaled like she had won something, like the conversation had gone exactly the way she expected. And maybe it had. Maybe. She thought that was the end of it. That I would go home, sit in my kitchen, and keep replaying her words until I convinced myself she was right. That I would shrink into that label she gave me. A victim. Someone who complains. Someone who exaggerates. Someone who doesn't understand how things work anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I picked up my purse, walked to the door, and let myself out without saying goodbye. The air outside was cold, sharper than it had been when I arrived, and I remember standing on the front steps for a second longer than necessary, just long enough to feel something settle inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Something quieter. Something clearer. Because 3 weeks later, that sentence, "Stop acting like a victim," would be played back in a room where silence meant something very different. And this time, I wouldn't have to say a single word. I drove home that afternoon without turning on the radio, without calling anyone, without even checking the time, just the sound of the road under the tires and the echo of her voice replaying in my head, not louder, just clearer with every mile. Like something that had already been decided long before she said it out loud. When I stepped into my kitchen, everything was exactly where I left it that morning, the coffee mug still in the sink, the mail stacked neatly by the door, a quiet kind of order that used to comfort me but felt different now. Like I was looking at a life that had slowly shifted without asking my permission. I set my purse down, took off my coat, and walked straight to the small drawer beside the refrigerator, the one I had not opened in months, maybe longer. Inside were the envelopes I had been putting aside, statements, notices, copies of documents I had told myself I would look at later when I had more time, when things felt less complicated, when I was ready. I sat down at the table and spread them out in front of me, one by one, flattening each page with the palm of my hand like I was trying to smooth something that had already been wrinkled too many times. The first thing I noticed was the dates. Then the amounts. Then the signatures. My name was there, written in a way that looked almost right, but not quite, the letters slightly tighter, the curve of the M just a little off, the kind of difference you would not question unless you had written that name thousands of times over 72 years. I did not rush. I did not panic. I just kept reading. Line by line. Page by page. There was a loan I did not remember authorizing, attached to an account that used to be simple, something I set up years ago to help Emily when she was starting her first job, a safety net I never thought would need to be questioned. There were transfers I could not place, amounts that moved in ways that did not match any conversation we had ever had. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything suddenly made sense in a way it had not before. The comments. The dismissive tone. The way she kept telling me I was remembering things wrong. I reached for the phone and called the number printed at the top of one of the statements, my voice steady when the representative answered, as if I was asking about something ordinary. I asked simple questions. When was this authorized? Who initiated the request? What documentation was on file? The answers came back just as calmly, each one placing another piece exactly where it belonged. I thanked them, hung up, and sat there in the quiet again. For a long time, I had thought confusion meant I was losing control of things. That maybe I was forgetting details. That maybe I was becoming exactly what she said I was. But that was not what this was. This was something else entirely. Something deliberate. Something organized. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligned the edges carefully, and placed them back into the drawer, not hidden this time, just waiting. Then I reached for my address book, flipped to a name I had not called in years, and dialed the number with the same calm I had used all afternoon. When he answered, I did not explain everything. I did not need to. I just said, I need to review some documents, and I need to do it properly. There was a pause on the other end, then a simple response. Come in tomorrow morning. I looked around my kitchen one more time before turning off the light, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel confused. I felt certain. Daniel Reeves had not changed much in 10 years, maybe a little more gray at the temples, a little slower when he stood up from behind his desk, but his eyes were the same. Sharp in a way that made you feel like nothing he said would be taken lightly or dismissed too quickly. His office smelled like paper and coffee, the kind of place where things were written down carefully and meant something long after the conversation ended. I sat across from him and placed the stack of documents on the desk without explaining them right away. He did not reach for them immediately. He just looked at me first, as if measuring whether I already understood what I had brought into that room. What would you like me to look at? He asked, his voice calm, professional, not rushed. I slid the papers toward him and said, everything. He nodded once and began. He did not skim. He read. Page by page, line by line, occasionally adjusting his glasses, occasionally making a small note on a yellow pad beside him. I watched his expression more than the documents, the slight tightening around his mouth when he saw something that did not sit right, the pause when he compared two signatures side by side, the way he leaned back once, briefly, before leaning forward again as if confirming something he already suspected. I did not interrupt. I did not ask what he was seeing. I had already seen enough on my own to know this was not a misunderstanding. After about 20 minutes, he set the papers down and folded his hands together. These signatures, he said, tapping one of the pages lightly, do not appear consistent. He chose his words carefully, but the meaning was clear. I nodded. I thought so. He looked at me again, this time longer. Did you authorize these transactions? No, I did not hesitate. I did not soften it. Just one word. He wrote something down, then continued. There are also transfers here that suggest a pattern, not a one-time error, not an isolated mistake. I felt something settle deeper inside me, not shock, not anger, just confirmation. A pattern, I repeated quietly. He nodded. Yes. And if what I am seeing is accurate, then this moves beyond a simple financial dispute. He did not say the word, but I understood it. I had understood it the night before, sitting at my kitchen table, tracing my own name with my finger and realizing it was not mine anymore. What do we do? I asked. Not because I did not have an idea, but because I wanted to hear it said out loud, in a room where things were documented, where words carried weight. He did not answer immediately. He reached for another document, flipped to the last page, then looked back at me. We proceed carefully, he said. We do not confront. Not yet. We document everything. We request records. We build a timeline. Each sentence was deliberate, measured, like steps that could not be skipped. I nodded again. That part made sense to me more than anything else. I had already learned what happened when you spoke too soon. And then? I asked. He held my gaze this time. Then we let the facts speak. The room was quiet again, but it felt different from the silence in my daughter's living room. This silence was structured, controlled, like something was being assembled piece by piece. I gathered my hands in my lap and realized they were steady. Completely steady. I do not want an argument, I said after a moment. I do not want to explain myself again. He gave a small nod, as if he had heard that sentence many times before from people who had already been dismissed once too often. You will not need to, he said. If we do this correctly, you will not need to say anything at all. I looked down at the documents one more time, then back at him. For the first time since that afternoon in my daughter's house, I felt something that was not confusion and not hurt. It was clarity. Quiet, precise clarity. All right, I said. Then let us do it correctly. And in that moment, without raising my voice, without making a single accusation, I stopped being someone who needed to be believed. I became someone who was going to be proven. I did not go back to my daughter's house after that meeting, not the next day, not the next week, not even when my phone lit up with her name flashing across the screen like nothing had changed, like we were still having ordinary conversations about ordinary things. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. And when I finally listened to her message later that evening, her voice sounded the same as it always had, casual, slightly impatient, asking if I could transfer some money to cover a short-term expense, something about timing. Something about accounts needing to be balanced before the end of the month. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, and listened to her explanation twice, not because I did not understand it, but because I wanted to hear how easily it came to her, how natural it sounded. I did not call her back. Instead, I placed the phone down, walked to the drawer, and took out the documents again. This time, I was not looking for confusion. I was looking for confirmation. The dates lined up. The amounts matched the requests she had made over the past year, small at first, then larger, always framed as temporary, always explained in a way that made me feel like I was helping, like I was still doing what I had always done as a mother. I sat down and wrote everything out on a single sheet of paper, not in paragraphs, not in explanations, just a list. Dates, transfers, signatures, calls, each entry short. Each one precise. When I finished, I placed that sheet on top of the stack and closed the drawer again. The next morning, I returned to Daniel's office. He did not ask why I had come back so soon. He simply looked at the new page I handed him and nodded once, as if this was the step he had expected. Good, he said quietly. This is exactly what we need. He added my notes to the file he had already started, organizing everything into sections, labeling each document, cross-referencing details I would not have thought to connect. Watching him work was like watching something take shape that had been invisible before, something structured and undeniable. We will request full account histories, he said, more to himself than to me, already writing as he spoke. We will verify every authorization. And we will preserve all communication. I nodded, even though I had already made a decision about that part. That afternoon, when Emily called again, I answered. My voice was calm, steady, the same way it had been in his office. She did not notice anything different. She asked about the transfer again, added a little urgency this time, a slight edge beneath the politeness. I listened. I let her finish. I will take care of it, I said. Simple. No questions. No hesitation. She exhaled softly, relieved, maybe even satisfied. Thank you, she said, her tone lighter now. I knew you would understand. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. I did not move for a few seconds. I just let the silence settle around me, the kind that no longer felt empty but deliberate. Then I picked the phone back up, opened the settings, and turned on a feature I had never used before. It took less than a minute. One small adjustment. No one would notice. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been and looked at it for a moment longer. From the outside, nothing had changed. I was still the same person answering her calls, still the same mother saying yes, still the same voice she thought she understood. But something had shifted, quietly, completely. I was no longer reacting. I was recording. And for the first time, I understood that I did not need her to admit anything, I did not need her to explain, and I did not need to convince anyone of what was happening. I only needed her to keep talking. The next few days followed a pattern that would have felt familiar to anyone watching from the outside, but from where I stood, every detail had shifted into something deliberate, something measured. Emily called more often than usual, sometimes in the morning, sometimes late in the afternoon, her tone always consistent, always controlled, as if she had already calculated what she needed from me before she dialed my number. I answered every time. I kept my voice steady. I said very little. She did most of the talking. She explained timelines, she mentioned upcoming payments, she reassured me that everything was temporary, that things would settle soon, that I did not need to worry about the details because she had already taken care of them. I listened. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to fill it. Each call ended the same way. Thank you, Mom. That word, Mom, sounded different now. Not warmer. Not colder. Just clearer. After each conversation, I placed the phone down in the same spot on the kitchen table and wrote down the time, the date, and a few key phrases she had used. Not everything. Just enough. Then I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and moved on with the rest of my day as if nothing unusual had happened. In the mornings, I made coffee. In the afternoons, I watered the plants by the window. Ordinary routines that looked unchanged, but underneath them, something was being built piece by piece. Every 2 days, I returned to Daniel's office. I did not stay long. I handed him what I had gathered, and he added it to the file without commentary, organizing each piece with the same quiet precision. One afternoon, he played a short segment back to me. My daughter's voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. It is just easier this way, Mom. You do not need to be involved in every detail. I listened without reacting. He paused the recording and looked at me, not asking a question, just waiting to see if I understood what it meant. I did. It was not just about the money anymore. It was about control. About who was allowed to know, who was allowed to question, and who was expected to stay quiet. We are getting closer, he said finally, his tone low, certain. I nodded. I did not ask how much closer. I did not ask what the final step would look like. I trusted the process because, for the first time, the process did not depend on how I was perceived. It depended on what could be proven. That evening, Emily called again. This time, there was a slight impatience beneath her words, something sharper that she did not bother to hide. Did you take care of that transfer? She asked. I could hear movement in the background, maybe Jason's voice, faint, out of focus. I paused for a second, just long enough to make the moment feel real. Yes, I said. She exhaled, quick, relieved. Good. I was getting a little concerned. Concerned. I repeated the word silently in my mind, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to remember how it sounded when she said it. You always come through, she added, softer now, almost reassuring, as if she was reminding herself of something she had never questioned before. I did not respond right away. I let the silence stretch, just for a moment. Then I said, I always have. And that was true. I always had. But for the first time, I understood that what I was doing now was not the same thing. I ended the call and set the phone down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table like I had done every time before. The room was quiet again, but it did not feel empty. It felt complete. Because somewhere inside that quiet, every word she had chosen, every request she had made, every assumption she had relied on was now part of something she could not control anymore. And she did not know it yet. Not when she said thank you. Not when she hung up the phone. Not even when she went to sleep that night believing everything was exactly as it should be. But soon she would. By the second week, the pattern began to shift in a way that was almost too subtle to notice unless you were looking for it, and I was. Emily stopped explaining as much. The details in her calls became shorter, more direct, like she assumed I no longer needed to understand anything beyond what she asked for. Just handle it, she said one afternoon, her tone flat, efficient. Not unkind. Not warm either. Just certain. I wrote that sentence down after we hung up, underlining it once, not because it was important on its own, but because it fit perfectly with everything else she had been saying. The consistency mattered. Daniel noticed it too when I handed him the updated notes. He read through them slowly, then placed the page on top of the growing file and tapped it lightly with his pen. Language patterns, he said, almost to himself. They reveal intent over time. I did not respond. I already understood what he meant. That same afternoon, he showed me something new. A timeline. Not handwritten like mine, but structured, printed, every entry aligned with a corresponding document. A call, a transfer. My notes had become part of something larger now, something that did not rely on memory or interpretation. It relied on repetition, on consistency, on proof. We are ready to move to the next step, he said, turning the page toward me. I looked at it without asking what that step was. I wanted to hear it the way he would say it. We file, he continued, his voice steady. And once we file, everything becomes part of the record. The record. That word settled differently than anything else he had said so far. It meant this was no longer private. No longer contained within my kitchen drawer or his office file. It meant every document, every signature, every recorded call would exist somewhere official, somewhere that did not depend on who believed whom. I nodded once. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, he said. After that, we do not reach out. We do not respond beyond what is necessary. We let the process unfold. That night, Emily called again. I answered the same way I always had, my voice even unchanged. She sounded distracted this time, like she was multitasking, her attention split between me and something else in the room. I might need another transfer by Friday, she said quickly. I will send you the details. I listened. I did not interrupt. Okay, I said. She paused for a second, just long enough for something in her tone to shift. You have been very quiet lately, she added, almost casually. Not accusing. Just noticing. I held the phone a little closer, not because I needed to hear her better, but because I wanted to be precise with my response. I am taking care of things, I said. It was the truth. Just not in the way she understood it. She accepted that answer without question. Of course she did. It fit the version of me she had already decided was real. The one who did not push back. The one who handled things quietly. The one who did not need to know everything. We ended the call the same way we always did. She said thank you. I said nothing more than necessary. After I set the phone down, I did not write anything immediately. I just sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle one more time. Tomorrow morning. Everything would change, not in the way arguments change things, not in the way conversations resolve anything, but in a way that could not be undone once it started. I stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and walked down the hallway without looking back. For the first time, I was not waiting for her next call. I was waiting for the record to speak. The next morning was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the world had stepped back just enough to let something precise take place without interruption. I arrived at Daniel's office 5 minutes early, not because I was anxious, but because I had learned that timing mattered now. He was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a stack of documents arranged neatly across his desk in a way that suggested everything had already been reviewed twice. He did not greet me with small talk. He simply nodded and gestured toward the chair. We are ready, he said. I sat down and looked at the papers in front of him, not reading them this time, just recognizing them. My notes. The statements. The signatures. The recordings, now transcribed into clean, typed pages that looked nothing like the conversations they came from. Everything had been translated into something formal, something structured, something that did not depend on tone or intention anymore. Once we file, this becomes official, he said, his voice steady, the same tone he had used from the beginning. There is no reversing it. I nodded once. I understand. And I did. This was not a conversation I could take back later. This was not something that could be softened or explained away. This was a record. He slid a document toward me and pointed to a line near the bottom. This acknowledges your authorization to proceed. I looked at the line for a moment, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it before I acted. Then I picked up the pen and signed my name, slowly, carefully, the way I always had, each letter deliberate, each curve exactly as it had been for decades. When I finished, I placed the pen down and looked at him. He took the document, added it to the stack, and stood up. "I will take care of the filing," he said. "You do not need to do anything else today." I stood as well, smoothing my hands against the fabric of my coat, a small habit I had not noticed until that moment. "What happens next?" I asked. He paused for a second, considering his answer. "Now we wait," he said. "Not for a reaction. For the process." I nodded again. Waiting was something I understood. I had been doing it for years, just without realizing it. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, sharper, clearer, like something had shifted that could not be undone. I drove home the same way I always did, the same streets, the same turns, but the quiet in the car no longer felt uncertain. It felt resolved. That afternoon, Emily called. The timing was almost exact, as if nothing in her world had changed at all. I answered on the second ring. "Did you get the details I sent?" she asked, her voice quick, efficient. I glanced at the phone, then back at the window in front of me. "Yes," I said. She continued talking, outlining what she needed, how soon, why it mattered. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not ask questions. When she finished, there was a brief pause, just long enough for her to expect something more from me. "I will take care of what needs to be done," I said. The words were familiar, but this time they meant something entirely different. She accepted them the same way she always had. "Thank you," she said, her tone softening slightly. "I knew I could count on you." I ended the call and placed the phone down gently on the table. The room was quiet again, but it no longer felt like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete. Somewhere, not far from where I sat, a document had just been filed that contained every word she had trusted me to forget, every detail she assumed I would never question, every signature she believed would never be examined closely. I did not need to confront her. I did not need to explain what I knew. Because from this point forward, it would not be my voice she would have to answer to. It would be the record. The first notice arrived 3 days later, not to me, but to her, and I knew that before my phone even rang, because Daniel had told me exactly how the process would unfold, not in emotion, not in confrontation, but in sequence, step by step, each action triggering the next without needing anyone's permission to continue. When my phone finally lit up with Emily's name, it was earlier than usual, and the way it rang felt different, sharper somehow, like the rhythm itself carried urgency. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," she said, and this time there was no softness in it, no controlled calm, just a tight edge I had never heard from her before. "Did you file something?" I did not respond immediately. I let the silence sit between us, not as a tactic, but because I wanted to hear what she would say next when I did not fill it for her. "I just got a notice," she continued, her words faster now, slightly uneven. "From a law office. They're asking for documentation, account histories, authorizations." "What is this about?" I looked out the window in front of me, the same view I had seen every day for years, and for the first time, it felt like I was standing outside of something instead of inside it. "It is a review," I said finally, my voice steady, measured. Not cold. Not warm. Just clear. There was a pause on the other end, longer this time. "A review of what?" she asked. I could hear movement again in the background, a door closing, footsteps, Jason's voice low and distant, asking something I could not quite make out. "Of the records," I said. Simple. Direct. Enough. "What records?" she pressed, her tone tightening further, the control she usually held slipping just slightly. I did not explain. I did not list anything. "The ones connected to my accounts," I said. Another pause. This one heavier. I could almost hear her thinking, recalculating, trying to place where this had come from, when it had started, how much I knew. "Mom," she said again, but this time the words sounded different, not automatic, not assumed. "Why would you do that without talking to me first?" That question hung in the air for a moment, and I realized how familiar it was, how many times I had asked a version of it myself over the years, quietly, without expecting an answer. I did not raise my voice. I did not mirror her urgency. Because I am not confused, I said. The words were simple, but they landed with a weight I could feel even through the phone. Silence followed, longer than any pause we had shared before. Then, quickly, almost defensively, she said, "No one said you were confused." I did not respond to that. I did not need to. We both knew what had been said, what had been implied, what had been repeated enough times to become something she believed. "You are overreacting," she added, the words coming faster now, reaching for something familiar, something that had worked before. "This is unnecessary. We can fix whatever you think is wrong." I listened. I let her finish. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "You do not need to fix anything." My voice did not change. "The record will show what is there." That was the first time I heard it clearly, the shift. Not in me. In her. The moment where certainty turned into something else, something less stable, something that did not have an immediate answer. She did not argue right away. She did not correct me. For a few seconds, there was only silence. And in that silence, I understood something I had not fully allowed myself to before. She had never expected me to step outside the role she had given me. She had never expected me to stop explaining, stop asking, stop trying to be understood. "We should talk about this in person," she said finally, her voice lower now, more controlled again, but not the same as before. I looked down at the phone in my hand, then back at the window. "There is nothing to explain," I said. "Everything is already written." I ended the call before she could respond, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a quiet decision made at the exact moment it needed to be. The room around me remained still, unchanged, but something else had shifted completely. The process had started. And this time, it was not built on what she said or what I felt. It was built on what could be shown, line by line, page by page, until there was nothing left to argue about. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later, not in a dramatic courtroom the way people imagine, but in a quiet office. Space where everything felt controlled, contained, almost ordinary if you did not understand what was actually happening beneath the surface. I arrived early again, just like before, and sat beside Daniel as he reviewed the final documents one last time, not because anything had changed, but because precision mattered until the very end. When Emily walked in, she did not look at me right away. Her eyes moved across the room first, taking in the table, the files, the presence of someone she did not expect to be there. Jason followed behind her, quieter than I had ever seen him, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. There was no greeting, no attempt at small talk, just a shift in the air that felt immediate and irreversible. When she finally looked at me, there was something different in her expression, not anger, not even frustration, but uncertainty, the kind that comes when something familiar no longer behaves the way it is supposed to. "Mom," she said, her voice lower now, more careful. I did not respond. I did not need to. The process had already begun, and this was no longer about what I said. It was about what had been recorded, documented, verified. Daniel opened the file and began, not with emotion, not with accusation, but with facts. Dates. Transactions. Signatures. Each one presented clearly, each one supported by the documents I had once kept hidden in a drawer. Then he moved to the recordings. He did not play everything. He did not need to. Just a few key moments, her voice clear, her words unmistakable. "It is just easier this way. You do not need to be involved. Just handle it." Each sentence placed exactly where it belonged, not exaggerated, not interpreted, just presented. I watched her as she listened, the shift happening slowly this time, not all at once, but piece by piece, as each layer was removed. "That is not what I meant," she said at one point, her voice tighter, trying to regain control of something that was no longer hers to manage. Daniel did not argue. He did not interrupt. He simply placed another document on the table, aligning it with the others, letting it speak in the same way everything else had. There was no moment of confrontation, no raised voices, no dramatic outburst. Just a gradual realization settling into the room, visible in the way she stopped speaking as often, in the way her questions became shorter, less certain. At one point, she looked at me again, really looked this time, as if trying to find the version of me she thought she understood. "Why did you not just talk to me?" she asked quietly. The question lingered for a second, but it did not carry the same weight it might have before. I met her gaze without hesitation. "I did," I said. My voice was steady, calm, unchanged. "You told me I was acting like a victim." The room went still after that, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they represented, a moment she could not rewrite, a sentence that had already been recorded, already placed into the record where it could not be softened or explained away. When it was over, there was no final speech, no declaration, no need for one. The documents remained on the table, organized, complete, undeniable. Daniel closed the file with a quiet finality, not dramatic, just finished. Emily did not say anything else. Neither did I. I stood up, gathered my coat, and walked out the same way I had walked into her house weeks earlier, but this time, there was no hesitation, no weight pressing down on me, no need to look back. Outside, the air felt the same as it always had, steady, familiar, but I was not carrying the same questions with me anymore. I did not need her to understand what she had done. I did not need her to agree with it or explain it. I had stopped needing that the moment I realized something simple, something I should have known all along. I was never a victim. I was someone who had finally stopped accepting being treated like one.